Negotiation via email is not an easy concept. We always like to think that when we negotiate that we have the ability to use all the different means to be successful. That would be, using verbal skills or nonverbal skills, just sitting there being able to develop a relationship with a person can make or break it. But when you do a negotiation via email, much of that is missing. Now, when I was learning about email negotiation, the first thing they told us was that they said sometimes you have to do it this way. Sometimes you cannot meet with the person face to face. But they always gave us what they said was from the most desirable to the least desirable. The most desirable was the face to face, followed by maybe a Zoom, followed by maybe a telephone call, then down to the email, and then just letters going back and forth in the mail. But the point that was always fascinating to me is that sometimes you have to do the email negotiation. You could be a world apart from somebody, or maybe you've got someone who they don't have time to meet with you face to face or by Zoom, and they want to do it, but it's such a tedious negotiation that you can't be done in 20 minutes. Is going to be over a period of time getting information from other parties and bringing it to the negotiation table. So they need times to see everything, to get the information, and send it back to you. The other thing is when it's a very complicated negotiation, where there's a lot of detail points into it that you want it to be in writing. And that's another reason why email negotiations are very, very common these days. Now, going back, during my training, I always thought was very fascinating is that it was having to do with eBay. Now, you're all familiar with eBay, but they said that sometimes people would be into disagreement about how they bought something or about what they got, and they would try to negotiate back and forth between the seller and the buyer. Now, I was actually studying negotiation and mediation. And it kind of took it from negotiation to being a mediator for when a negotiation breaks down. And what I found out was about 85% of the negotiations, when there was a conflict on eBay, they broke down and had to go to some form of a mediator. But the thing that I always like to come back and tell you is that, email negotiation can be extremely successful. I'm not going to say it's going to be as successful as it would be a face-to-face, but there's a lot of value to them. And so as we start this, I just want to first bring up and show you here just about people who are looking at emails based upon their different ages and their jobs. And you can look at this and get a pretty good idea. In terms of gender, it's about equal on that. But you can see certain ages are more involved with the email, the online, than maybe other generations. And also you can look in there and you see how certain different job types are too. And when you think about the number of times people check their email daily, you can see their work, of course, is checked more. But what's interesting here, now, of course, this is a few years old, as you can see, is going down. People are checking emails less. Maybe that's because they're using text. But that also tells you that when you're doing an email negotiation, that there's a high chance that someone just misses the email. You send a response and they may miss it. So that's just another something to be aware of. And of course, you can take a look at here and talk about what's the most annoying part of the work emails. They get the emails too often, they're too wordy, they're poorly written. That is very, very true when you're talking about email negotiation, because sometimes they just write way too much. Other times they don't write enough. Bullet points are very successful, but at the same time, you're having to build your personality into that email. And people can misinterpret blunt words into that you're being standoffish. But they also can misinterpret that if you're trying to build yourself, your character into the email too much by being too wordy, then they don't even bother to read it, because people will, of course, they're going to scan through the emails. And here's also something just about the number of times people are checking emails. So just something you can take a look at. And the last one I want to show you here, oops, I'm sorry, I think we just went to the same one. So now let's talk about some of the key concepts of negotiation. And these just kind of a background. So first thing, preparation. Okay, that's for any negotiation. A lot of people, when they do email negotiation, they don't think they have to prepare as much because they have more time. That's not true. before you go into any email negotiation, just like a face-to-face negotiation, you better really do your background work. Get your bat, know where it needs to be, understand your target point, know if you're going to anchor, at what point you're going to anchor, your reservation points, all those great things in there. So make sure you're prepared as you go into it, because if you don't, believe it or not, it really shows. And it shows even more so. And this is a point I want to make to you, is that when you're doing a face-to-face negotiation, people will see things, they'll hear things, they'll jot little notes down. But when you're doing an email, remember, those words you're putting on the email, they are literally carved in stone. People can scroll back and take a look at it, and they can read about things, and they can see how you have changed. You're doing a face-to-face. They may hear some different changes, the way you're talking about things, and maybe you changed your mind about a few things. But in the email, it's not a matter of them trying to remember, because they have the evidence right in front of them. They scroll right back and say, well, now that's not what you said last time. So that's the reason why preparation is so important. And then like it says here, you need to know what you know and what you don't know, and always watch out for, of course, for those biases and things. Now, email negotiations has the same points as a regular face-to-face. You're going to have a bargaining zone, your ZOPA. You're going to have your BATNA, your best alternative to negotiate agreement. You're going to set your reservation value, or reservation point. But there's some other items that we kind of look at, which are in basic all negotiation, and like how you're going to prioritize your interests. And then we do what we call log rolling. We'll talk about that in a second. And then also never give anything away for free. And we'll explain that to you. But first, let's talk about what log rolling is. Now, this is a classic definition of log rolling, which is this exchanging of assistance or favors, specifically the trading of votes by legislators to secure favorable action on projects or interests. Okay, so how does log rolling really work in negotiation? It's basically a trading. It's say, I'll do this if you give me this. I mean, we do that all the time. We're kind of making concessions. But one of the things about log rolling is that sometimes you have to give up what you want to get what you need. And now think about that for a second. What you want may not be what you actually need. So in negotiation, it doesn't matter if it's email or face-to-face, you always have to be thinking about what the end result is. What is it that you're really trying to get to? So we actually see more log rolling in email negotiation because it's a little bit more clear to you, because you've got this trail that you can look at that tells you what people are giving up and what you're trying to get. So there's not as much of this ambiguity and being ambiguous as there is of really knowing with that backup trail. Now we have what's called the 5 rules or the 5 thumbs of successful negotiation. And this is even more stronger when you talk about email association, because first one is there is no giveaway. Number 2, help yourself. The U is understand yourself. The M is make justifiable demands and concessions. And the B is to be curious. Once again, this goes across all negotiations, but let's talk about how we actually can fit it into the email negotiations. First of all, it says there is no giveaways. What that means is that you're really never bringing anything to the table that doesn't have a value. Everything has a value. It has a priority. It could be a high, a medium, or a low priority. But always remember that what may be of value to you may be of no value to the other party, or what may be of very little value to you may be of greater value to them. It's that whole concept is one person's trash is another person's treasure. And people will make a mistake, and the mistake they make is that they're assuming because it's of no value to them that they can just kind of give it away, okay? And that's why we say there are no giveaways. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to think to yourself, how do I decide what the priorities are? So let's say we got 3 items. We're going to list those 3 items on a piece of paper, and we're going to put on one side of it our priorities, and on the other side of it, we're going to put their priority to it. My priority may be the top one's the most important, the second one's also very important, the third one is not important at all. But when I try to figure out their priority, the other person's priority, I may find out the first one is a high priority, but the second one is a low priority, but the third one is a very big priority for them. So what may be low for me could be very important for them. And this is a common mistake that people make in negotiation, is that they're assuming the other person's priorities are the same as yours when you have something that you can give away. And you say, how does that actually work? I always like to go in there and say, if you're trying to buy a car in the car dealership, for them to do oil changes, every 6 months for 5 years is really nothing. I mean, what is that like, $19-20? But for the buyer of the car who maybe grew up where his dad told him you've got to get that oil change all the time, that may be a very high priority to him. So once again, what's low could be high to the other person. Next one is the H for help yourself. Now this is where it gets a little hard, because one of the ways you help yourself is, like I said here, is you're trying to sell the vision of what you want to get the right outcome, how to engage the other party, how to gather all the information, and then of course to be flexible. And this gets very, very difficult when you're talking about email negotiation, because the way you help yourself, the best way to do it is in that breaking the bread concept. You remember, that's the first part of the negotiation, of the face-to-face negotiation, even the telephone negotiation, is the breaking the bread and getting to know the other people. Talk about each other. Hey, what do you like? What's your family like? Where did you grow up? Getting that information that helps you to build the narrative that you're going to launch into to get what you want. Now, that's very difficult in an email negotiation. We're going to talk more about that later, because you don't have the ability to sit there and look at them to have the nonverbal and the verbals too. And during that breaking the bread is when you quite often can really sell your vision of what you're trying to get. And that's when you really engage the person too, to make a connection with them. Well, on the email, you've got to do it a different way. And the way you typically do that on the email is that you're going to have to open up your email with just some nice casual tones. Don't jump right into it. Don't jump right into the negotiation. Start off with some real nice tones. And we're going to talk about this again in a moment, about, how are things going for you? Did you get affected by the weather? What do you think about, what are you going to be doing this summer? You got any great plans? How's the family doing? So you're trying to build that up. At the same time, you're trying to also sell your vision. Is that, well, I'm going to be doing such and such in the summer, so I need to get this kind of taken care of in the next, probably the next 30 days. So I really need to get this decision made, talking about what you're negotiating in the next number of days. The next one here is understand yourself. Understand what your strengths and your weaknesses are. Now, the reason why I have this slide here is because we're talking about face-to-face, telephone, Zoom, and email negotiation. Now, I could be wrong, but I'm going to step out on the limb and say, I bet you're not great at all 4 of those. But I'm also going to tell you is that you're also not lousy at all 4 of those either. Typically, people are good at 2 of the 4 negotiations. And I'm going to say, if you may be a great face-to-face, you may be great on the email, but you may not be so hot on the telephone. So this is where the more you negotiate in your life, the more you start understanding that, hey, I kind of like the email negotiation. I do well with this. I understand how to build a rapport via email. Or you may sit there and say, I love the face-to-face, I like the Zoom, but I just can't get that email down. So don't be upset or disturbed if you're better at one and not better at the other. Now, when you're making what we call those justifiable demands and concessions, you can see here is that a justifiable demand, you got to be very objective with the data. When you're doing a face-to-face, you can put all the expressions, your nonverbals into it. You can raise your tone, your speed of your voice. You can lower it. You can talk softer, all those great things. But on the email, it doesn't work that way, does it? So that's why you got to put more data into it. And the challenge here is you put more data, but realize if you put too much there, they're not going to read it. Right? So you've got this problem is that you don't want a 5-page email because they're not going to read it, but you got to get the data. That's why we tell people the bullet points is your best friend. But the bullet points are blunt statements, but you better get your paragraph above it and your paragraph below it very cordial. that's where your warmth comes out. And then you have your blunt bullet points, and then you finish off with a very warm kind of concluding statement. And then it says there, what about justifiable concessions? And it says here you have to be able to explain your reason. Now, once again, this goes across all negotiation, but particularly it happens in email negotiation. The reason why is what I said once before, is that there's a long paper trail. And what you maybe said before, and someone thinks, okay, he said this, but now he says something different. They go back through all those all that trail, and they look and they come back and say, yeah, but now, John, back in November when we were talking about this, you said this. Why are you changing your mind at this point? So you see, you kind of get your feet held to the fire more in an email negotiation. So that's why we say here, if you make any type of changes, have a really good reason. Well, your reason may be, well, George, it's because we have changed some of the thoughts, and that's caused me to think that what I thought was very important back in November may not be as important now as it was back then. So you got to be able to explain all those things. Last one is be curious. Always be curious, because your bias will lead you into making assumptions. And the worst thing you can do is to assume anything. Remember, just any time in any negotiation, don't assume, ask questions, especially in the email. And the hardest thing about here is that you may not assume anything because you're being taught how to be a good negotiator, but they do assume things. So they write back to you and they put it all in capital letters, and you're assuming that oh my gosh, they're yelling at me. No, don't do that. Don't assume that. I've had people before that when I've questioned them, say, why is everything capital letters? They come back and say, oh, I didn't realize I had my cap locks on. Now, okay, they were not yelling at me, but that's the reason why never misread, never assume things. Always go back and ask. If you ask things, it's teaching the other party to ask you about things that they don't understand. Now, getting into the crux of the email negotiation, here's some things to look at. First of all, research tells us that there's a greater tendency to lie or exaggerate on email negotiations. Also to bluff and to intimidate, to play hardball negotiations, acting more powerful, because all this is because you're hiding behind something. Now you're sitting there saying, what are you hiding behind? You're not hiding behind the computer, literally. You just are hiding behind distance in there. You're hiding behind time too. And so when people are not face to face with somebody, and this research tells us this, and this is not anything new to you, but when you're face to face with somebody, sometimes you're a little bit more cautious about the words you choose, about saying something. Particularly, you may not be pushing yourself just too much, because as you get too powerful, you may see they may start getting a little powerful back against you. You're playing hardball, they're going to play hardball with you. But in an email, people have a tendency to think, I can do more of it, and they will. So always realize that everything is I'm not going to say everything is increased by 1.5%. I'm going to say things almost are always 1.25% more. So when instead of them sitting there saying, this is important, they may say, this is really important. You may find them using words like this. And I'm going to tell you in a moment when that is appropriate. But these are things you got to watch out for. Next thing there, it says negotiation. You don't feel like you're being pressured because you're not in a live performance. That's a nice part, because people feel a little bit more relaxed about it. But at the same time, remember, they will hide behind the time. And when I say that, is that here comes, you're saying, can you let me know if you like this offer, and we can move forward with it? And here goes 1 day, and 2 days, no response, and 3 days, no response. You're kind of antsy. You're kind of sending another email saying, did you get the first one? Maybe went to your spam filter. I'm still kind of interested. And, here comes another day. They're waiting. Okay, now, are they playing the waiting game on you? Are they doing this on purpose as a strategy? Or are they just too busy? Or is it just because, hey, I got to take care of other things, where if it was a face-to-face, they actually be jumping on it a little bit quickly. So just something to always worry. When time is involved, how is that time actually being used? Now, it says also it's very difficult to build rapport. That makes total sense. the breaking the bread, getting to know people. You can't do that like you could on a in-person negotiation. I tell people all the time is that just because it starts as an email negotiation, it doesn't have to always stay that way. Anytime you want to, you can pick up a phone and call somebody. Hey, George. Hey, I know we're talking on the email. Just want to see how things are going. I know we're going back and forth about these things. Is there anything you want to talk? So it's okay to pick up a phone. Also, it says too, is that if you can, you'll see this in a moment. If you can start off with a in-person meeting and then take it to an email, that's even better. Then it talks about how communication is a challenge. People sometimes they get a little bit more rude. And the reason why this happens is that you may find someone gets rude in a face-to-face because of something you said or some issue. But on an email, I've seen people get rude, and the reason why, or they get very abrupt, and the reason why has nothing to do at all with the negotiation. It's because something happened. They just finished spilling the coffee all over their desk, or maybe their daughter called and said, "Dad, I just wrecked the car," So when you get into email negotiations, all of a sudden you got this situation going where you don't know what else is happening. I used to tell people all the time is that wouldn't it be nice if you have a flat tire that you would leave the flat tire on the car, but instead what we do, we put that tire on our shoulder and we carry it all day with us because it just kind of gnaws at us, and that affects us, particularly when you're trying to email over a period of time. Last one it says there is very easy for people to say no. In face-to-face negotiations, people typically don't just say no. They will be a little bit more tactful. They'll say things like, "I'm not sure I agree with that." But in email negotiation, what the research tells us, people will just come out flat and say, "No, I will not do that," or "No, that doesn't work for me." They get that little blunt, and it looks like they're putting a wall up, and they may be putting a wall up, or they're just communicating very bluntly, and there may not be as big of a wall as you think it is. And that goes back to is that your job is to, okay, well, what can we do to get that no where we can make it to work? So that's where you're asking more and more questions about things. A couple things to remember, like it says here, the email messages tend to be more aggressive and more self-interested. When people are writing, the difference is that you write talking about what you want. But when you're talking, sometimes, once again, this is research tells us that people not only talk about what they want, but they're a little bit more looking toward that win-win, because they're reading your nonverbals, they're reading your verbals and things. But in the email, people have a little bit more self-interest going on there. It says humor falls apart or is misinterpreted. Oh my gosh, yes. I've seen that countless times where even the slightest word has been misinterpreted and people kind of get flared up over it. Emails do not require what we call the politeness ritual. And that politeness ritual basically says that what we're going to do is that we're going to be nice, we're going to be courteous until someone starts treating us poorly. In email rituals, people quite often will just go straight into it. Well, this is what we're going to be talking about, and this is what I like to have. So where's that politeness? Is that, you tell me what you'd like to see, and here's some things I would like to see us do. Okay, what happened to that politeness? Well, it goes away when you're talking about emails on that. Next thing is some strategies. First of all, if you can meet up front, if you can meet with the people up front, that's the best way to do it. If you can't meet with them, maybe have a phone call first. Get on the phone, talk to them, try to break that bread, try to have some type of understanding with each other before you jump into the email. Next thing, continue to build rapport. So that bread breaking continues, and it sometimes breaks down more in the face-to-face, but it almost is non-existent in email negotiations past the very first session, because people kind of like, I don't have time for that. I'm getting at here is that we need to conduct business, so that's why you've got to keep coming back into that rapport, talking about, and put in an email. Hey, let's talk about number 3, number 4, but first, how was your vacation? Everything go well on the vacation? Try to keep that rapport going. Okay. have yourself a well-established goal. Make sure you're not all over the board. Make sure you're very categorized. Use lots of numbers, bullet points. These are the items: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. If you can brainstorm offline, which that means basically is that brainstorming is where you keep throwing ideas out back and forth. Sometimes that's best where instead of doing it, that you can literally just get on the telephone or meet. Now, there's another part of it. Brainstorming means that you're throwing a bunch of ideas out, seeing what can work. It didn't say that you're going to throw out the idea. You're throwing out a bunch of ideas, and you probably don't want that carved in stone. You know how that goes. That they can always go back and say, well, you said this, So that's why we kind of discourage brainstorming online. Try to do it offline. If you see a conflict coming up, for any reason at all, try to squash it. Say, hey, what's wrong? Did I say something wrong? And once again, it's very, very difficult to resolve conflict on emails. That's where, if all possible, pick up the telephone and say, hey, I am sorry. If I said something that upset you, I didn't mean to, So ask more questions, not less. Keep the climate positive. If you think things are getting a little sour, things are getting a little kind of testy about things, pull it back. Change your language in there. Start talking very nice. Use more, I don't want to say colorful words, but more positive type of words. And then it says there, sprinkle in the personal touch. Show them it's you. I'll give you a good example of this. I was training a group of students how to do email negotiation. I had a young man, he was from Britain. He actually was from Bath. He was at the University of Bath, or Bath University, whatever it's called. And it was fun because every time we emailed back and forth, his Britishness came out. Not only the way he spelled things, but he would sign things off, thanks, Governor. And then, he just little British things were coming out. It was kind of cool because I really could see his personality coming through this. And some of the things like, we talk about trash, they talk about rubbish. He was sitting there saying, yeah, the rubbish bin is overfull. And then he goes, oh, that's right. You call it trash, but for us, it's rubbish. And the rubbish bin, you call it a trash can. So not only did it create some humor, but it really kind of brought up his personality. That's good. And you can do that even with someone who's identical to yourself. And that's why it says down here at the very bottom, share something about yourself personally. Go in there, and there's nothing wrong sitting there talking about it. Say, hey, I'm sorry I'm a day late and get back with you, but the kids had a basketball game I was at last night. They didn't win, but that's okay. We still went out, had a good time at pizza and all that. So it's okay to put things in like that, just trying to make it a little bit more personal. Now, watch that your email are not crossing each other. It's just like two ships in the night. It says two ships that are passing each other in the night. And let me give you the example of what I mean here. You probably already have a pretty good idea. So here you've got this email chain going. You write it, you send it off, they respond, it comes back, you respond, they respond. Okay, it's going back and forth. Okay, what happens if you're in there and you say, okay, well, I'll buy the house as long as you give me some extra money for the roof. And the extra money needs to be about $4,000 to $5,000, and you send it off. And you think to yourself, well, now hold it. Not only that, but maybe instead of the roof, maybe if they just replace one of the air conditioning units. So you shoot off another email that says, oh, and not the roof, we can maybe do something with air conditioning unit instead. Okay, now what happened? You created two chains, right? That one chain that was so good going back and forth that you can always see what's going on. Now you got that second chain going. Okay, before they read the one about the air conditioner, they've already written you back and said, okay, yeah, we'll do the roof. I can't do $8,000. I can do like $4,000. Okay, it comes back to you and you're kind of like, well, now hold it. What about the air conditioner? And so you send them something to say, did you see my email about the air conditioner? And you send it back and they haven't even read it, but they get this email about the air conditioner coming back on the roof one. Okay, y'all got it. You know what I'm talking about here. That's the problem. Emails will cross back and forth. Does that happen in a face-to-face? No, because, someone talks to the other person, hopefully, gets quiet and lets that person talk. I mean, yeah, you have some interruptions in there, but email, that is the most deadly part of email negotiations. Is that number one is that you've lost the initial single chain that has all the information into it, because now you've diluted it by having a second or third chain. Okay, that's a major problem, and that can cause things to fall apart, and it can upset people and frustrate people very much. And the second bad part about this is that once you start this, then it's extremely hard to stop, because before you know it, you don't know where those are, and these emails are popping up, and you don't know which one is for which one without you sitting there looking at the timestamp and everything else. If it happens, that's where you have got to go in there and say, you know what, George, hold it. We're gonna need to stop and let's start over again. And you may have one to go in there and copy and paste and say, let's start a new chain in there. Of course, as always, if you can get on the telephone, that's a great way to do it. Now, there's a great saying from P.D. James, and it is a she. She says, not so much two ships passing in the night as two ships sailing together for the same, but always bound for different ports. And that's really what I'm talking about here. It's not that you got two ships crossing in the night, they don't see each other, even though that's the concept of emails going back and forth without realizing what the other person is sending. But you're literally are both going the same direction, but you're trying to go two different places. So you're going the same direction, but you're going two different ports. And so I always love what P.D. James says, because it really kind of explains that you're on the same path, but you got different goals you're trying to do. And you got to get those goals back in alignment so you both understand what each other's goals are. So I just love that quote there. Now, a couple of things as we finish out here. We've got a couple more little slides here. Is about the email biases, flaming biases, making incendiary remarks, just like those sinister biases. But what will be a flaming bias? I've had this before where someone writes me back and I make an offer and they come back and say, well, that was a stupid offer. Do you think I'm an idiot? Okay, that's a flaming bias. I mean, how am I going to respond back to that? Shall I respond back and say, well, if it takes one to know one, I don't know. I mean, so, you got to watch that. So if someone does that, just ignore those flaming, comments and just kind of come back and say, well, I thought this was a good offer, but maybe we need to talk about it more. Because you always have to worry about those things. And there are people out there that, boy, they'll sit down, they'll just type that thing like crazy and send it out. I think maybe one of the best example was what we call Lincoln on leadership, where Lincoln, he got so mad at his generals and his cabinet members because they were doing stupid things that he would take out a letter and he would just really ream them out on that letter, just ream them out. And then he'd take that letter, he'd fold it, put it in an envelope, put their address on it, and then he'd put it in his desk drawer. And his idea was, I'm going to wait for about a week. In a week, I'm going to pull it out, and if I still feel that way, I'm going to send it. Well, you know what happens. I mean, you know the story. Is that a week later, pulls up and he goes, I'm glad I didn't send that one out because, I didn't know all the information, or maybe things got resolved or whatever it is. And you didn't end up sending a few of them out. But they said that after Lincoln was assassinated and they're cleaning out the White House for, I think, Andrew Johnson was the next president, they found a whole stack of these letters he had written to different people in his cabinet and his generals that he just never mailed out to them. And so that's a good thought about emails in the first place, but particularly about email negotiation, because those biases get us where, someone, and like I mentioned before, you never know, are they having a bad day that they sent you that email, or are they having a bad day is why they send you a kind of not so good offer and you want to respond back with that as a stupid offer, but then you have to hold yourself back by saying, okay, maybe they were having a bad day. So this is where it's really important that you just kind of keep your cool, and if you see something you don't like, just give it a day or two on that. Okay, always watch those line biases. We've talked about that. The visual biases. We can't see people. Something that research has told us is that when you see people, particularly in negotiation, you build up a little bit of loyalty toward that person as you see them. Particularly if you're going back and negotiating with a person, you may negotiate over a period of a week or two, you're seeing them every other day or whatever. You pick up a little bit of a liking and a loyalty to them. But we know that does not happen on the email. because the email is just the written word. So you got to worry about that. And then the last thing here is about the busy bias. People will hide behind that, most definitely. They'll hide behind, so I'm just too busy to get to it. You don't know if they're trying to put you on that waiting game like I mentioned before, or they really are too busy. But, don't read too much into it. Is it a game you can play? Sure, sure. I've said this before when I teach negotiation, is that negotiation is a game. You just have to play it better. So if you need to use the busy as a way to, they send you a email with an offer, you don't like it, and you can wait for 2 or 3 days to see if they come back. What are they going to do? They're going to come back, hey, did you get it? You write back and say, I haven't had time to look out, try to get to it after a while. You put them off another couple of days, they may come back and make another offer, or they may make another concession. So it's a game that you can play to get what you want, but also sometimes it really does happen where people do get very busy. The status quo. This is something that's kind of you need to understand. The traditional status quo are typically they're missing there. Status quo could be that you're dynamic, you're charismatic way of doing things. They are less that way on the email for obvious reasons. So people who are very, very charismatic in person, on emails they're not. If you use the charismatic or dynamics when you're negotiating in person, it's very, very hard to put it into an email. Next thing is power status is minimized. Now think about that for a second. Is that if you walk into, and here let's say you're a 25-year-old college student, you're going to walk in there and you're going to have a face-to-face negotiation over a grade with your professor who's 55 wearing a suit and tie. The power status is very, very clear. But when it goes online, it's amazing how that power status starts to disappear, because all of a sudden people become more equal. Even though they're not equal, people start assuming themselves in more of an equal role. I've always been amazed when people walk my office, they always refer to me as, well, hello, Dr. Wilt. But I've had people email me, students email me, and they'll say, hey, Randy. Okay, they would never say that to me in my office, but on the email, I guess they feel like it's okay to say something like that. So anyhow, the power status will change in there. And then of course, the next thing is the status cues, things like, the way people dress, in their age and their gender, all that stuff is missing. You can still figure it out. You can figure out the gender, maybe you can figure out their age, some of their mannerisms, but a lot of those things are missing in there. People are less likely to conform to the social norms. Those are things like, that politeness. Sometimes they get more abrupt in there. So don't take it the wrong way, and make sure that you stay away from stuff like that, that you don't become abrupt. Now, the next slide here says a picture is worth 1,000 words. And remember, it says to watch your word ratio. Now, what I'm talking about right here is that you've got to use the email in a negotiation to show your excitement, to show your charisma, to show your dynamic ways of things. And sometimes words don't do it. Now, you do want to use words like, very, really, this is really important to me, instead of just this is important. So you need to put those things, you need to build your emotion into it. But sometimes pictures, you may think this is silly, but this is something that they teach when we teach email negotiation. If someone sends you the offer and you really like it, and they say, I can do this and this and this because you're going to do this and this. I've had people go back and they'll grab a picture and they'll send a picture. What we agreed upon is perfect. That's just not saying yes, I'll accept. This is showing that, you're excited about it. Now, if I made an offer and someone sent that back to me, I would think, boy, we have got this going. We're on the right track. It would make me feel good too. So this is why we say sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words. There's nothing wrong with putting a picture, even a happy face, to putting a picture on an email to express what you're thinking. And I'm not saying if you don't like it, don't show the atomic bomb blowing up, but you always do want to go in there and show your emotions the most you can on those emails. Now, a few final thoughts here is, first of all, watch the negative tone. It's very easy. We don't use negative tones as much in the face-to-face as we do in the email. So watch those things like, I don't think so, or this is a problem. The word I put in there, but. I hate that word. But builds a wall is what it does. So what's another word? Well, the most common word people say is however. At least that says there's an alternative. I just have always been a big believer. Instead of saying, but let's do this, I always come back and say something like, here's another thought, or here's another idea. So think of things that are easy and more, I don't want to say soothing, but easy and more accommodative, and not so much that they look like you're in a competitive mode. Next thing, build that emotional engagement, build that social engagement, and build that task engagement. And let me explain those. You've already seen my emotional engagement with the picture that says perfect. Okay, that's building emotional. How do you build that social engagement? Hey, how'd your kids do the basketball game? You told me y'all are going to go on vacation. So how was your vacation? That's the social. What's the task engagement? Is to go back and remind them. Now, this is important, folks. Remind them what you're talking about. It's so easy to lose track of it because you got so much going on there. So periodically, you got to go back and say, okay, now, remember, these are the 5 points we're talking about. We've already covered these 2. Remember, this is what we decided upon. Now we're still talking about number 3, 4, and 5. So, you've got to keep coming back on task. Keep bringing that task up there. And remember, your email train can get so long that you start forgetting things. So what are you going to do? Are you going to print out all those papers? I doubt it. But at the same time, the way the computers work nowadays with the emails is they start compressing things together where you have to go through and click through all these files. So if you see something that is important, print it out. There's nothing wrong with that. I know people say, oh, but that's not the purpose of being online. Well, when you're talking about negotiation, you don't want to lose any information at all. You don't want to lose a thought. You don't want to lose a decision. So if something is decided, print out that page, have a folder, put it in there so you can go back and refer to it. And last thing here it says these 2 is watch your verbs and your pronouns. Some people, they write too much, and this is just typical in emails. So they use the I's, the me's, the you's, the us. Try to write in the third person. It's a little bit softer. It's a little bit more vague, but people pretty much, if you're just emailing one person, you know who's saying about what. If you've got 4 or 5 people in the email, boy, you got the challenge on your hands. And then make sure you have very much action words like, let's continue to work on this, or if you've got time that we can meet and talk on the phone about things. It uses the word align in there. So all these things are things that are important. My final comment comes from Leah Thompson, and she is kind of the guru of email negotiation. And she says, whether we realize it or not, people quickly develop impressions of our personalities on the basis of very limited information. How true that is. Always remember that. People will read what you say, they will make assumptions, they will think about how you're making the statement, they will tell if you are blunt, they'll tell if you have run-on sentences, that will define you. Whereas in a face-to-face, they're looking more at the way you communicate in a face-to-face actual environment, the way you look, your actions, your mannerisms, all that. So it's very, very important. So as we finish this topic about email negotiation, I go back and bring up 2 points to you. First of all, if you can, always try to do a face-to-face. If you can't do that, Zooms are great. If you can't do that, telephones, then emails. And what's beyond that is where you just write the letter, you put it in the mail, what is that called, snail mail, and you send it that way. But always realize is that you may need to pick up the phone. Never think you don't have the phone. Well, maybe you don't have it. Maybe you're emailing someone who doesn't have a phone. But if you can pick up the phone and call and talk to them, to clear up things or to kind of move things along a little faster is always a good idea. Next thing I want to point out to you is that you've really got to work hard to make the email very personable. That is what's going to make this thing work, because people will now start to engage with you and they will feel like there's a connection. Email can be hidden behind, just like most online things. It's very hard to develop a connection. You know, Facebook was awesome because people were putting pictures and you could form a connection with people because of images. But can you do that just with black and white text or black text on white paper? Very hard to. So that's why developing the personal engagement is so important. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this. Have a great rest of your day.